So, good morning everybody, dear colleagues and also dear future colleagues here. Wow. I'm very pleased to be here in St. Petersburg for my first time, and I'm deeply grateful to the Russian and the German organizers for being invited to this conference. I am going to present a new German research project which has been started in 2012. It's closely connected to modern German-Russian history and archaeology. In chronological respect, it's dealing with the Iron Age in the southwestern Baltic area. Different from other papers we have already heard, my lecture will not offer new data and methods. Instead, I will present old materials from past research, and I will ask whether they can be used as a source for new investigations. The title of our project, as you can see it here, is quite long and maybe a little bit complicated too, at least at first sight. The project focuses on settlement archaeology in an area of work between River Vistula in the west, and River Neman in the north. It's marked in yellow here. Before World War II, this area formed the German province of East Prussia with its capital Königsberg, nowadays Kaliningrad. Today, these territories belong to Russian Federation, to Poland and to Lithuania. The space of time covered by the project ranges from circa 500 BC up to 1250 AD. That is the assumed beginning of the Iron Age in the region until the time of the conquest by the Teutonic Order. Two important keywords in our studies are the terms continuity of research and research of continuity. What they imply, I will now try to illustrate. But let me just start with a few words on the structure of the project. It was initiated by the German archaeologists Klaus von Karner-Bornheim in Schleswig and Matthias Wemhoff in Berlin. The long-ranging research, it will be 18 years in total, is funded by the German Academy of Sciences and Literature in Mainz. 3 archaeologists are working in the project, supported by several doctoral students over the years. Colleagues from different countries related to the research topics as well as to the area of work attend the project as members of our advisory board. Here you see our project team. Perhaps you, at least some of you know my colleagues and our project directors Klaus von Karner on the left picture and Matthias Wemhoff on the right one, and me together with my 2 colleagues Timo Ibsen and Jaroslav Prasolov. My presentation now is divided into 3 parts. The first one will explain the basis for our project. The second one will present some archaeological and chronological aspects. And part 3 will be a short forecast on the next steps of our work. Archaeological research in former East Prussia goes back to the end of the 18th centuries. The academic societies that have to be mentioned in this context, two academic societies have to be mentioned in this context. The elder one, established in 1790, was the Physical Economical Society, and half a century later, the so-called Prussia Society was founded. Both formed the basic for the huge and famous East Prussian collections of the 20th century. In these early times, society members weren't, of course, educated archaeologists, but had different roots in academics. Ernst August Hagen, for example, was an art historian, and since 1830 he was first professor of art history in Prussia. Otto Tischler, who was one of the leading academics in the late phase of the physical society, studied mathematics and natural sciences. From the very beginning, both societies undertook substantial excavations and published regularly, mainly in their journals. But, for example, yesterday we already heard about Otto Tischler and his contributions to digging of grave mounds by Gisela Eberhard. The archaeological record in East Prussia, brought together by the two societies, constitutes the later Prussia Museum in the castle of Königsberg. In 1879, first archaeological objects were exhibited there. In late 19th and 20th centuries, the collections counted among the most extensive and important ones in Europe. Unfortunately, the total number of objects is unknown. Estimations range between 250,000 up to 400,000 artifacts. By the catastrophe of World War II, also the long tradition of archaeological research in the region ended abruptly. Parts of the museum inventories, for example, Find magazine and archive, were packed to be brought to the West, while others, mainly the exhibition parts, were kept in the town. During wartime, the traces of former Prussia collections got lost, and after 1945, they appeared to have been destroyed completely. However, Russian expeditions in the ruins of the castle brought some parts of the treasures to light again, among others the so-called inventory books. But when the castle ruins were blasted in 1968, just a small amount of this former stock had appeared again. Only few people knew at this time that also bigger parts of the Prussia collections were saved, for example in East Berlin, in the Academy of Sciences. For the first time ever, they came to light after the break of the wall. Approximately 50,000 objects and also 50,000 documents survived, even though in a very bad condition, not only damaged, but having lost nearly all their original context, as you can see on the both pictures here. After, meanwhile, several years of clean-up operations on objects and archival materials, the data is now available again for scientific research. Here on these pictures you see the magazine of the Prussia magazine in the Museum for Prehistory and Early History in Berlin. One of the main tasks is, of course, to re-identify the objects and to reconnect them with their former archaeological context. Only few items still hold their old inventory numbers. Wie macht man den hier? You can see it here. Some of the objects still have these small cards, and there you find the name of the archaeological site and also the context the object belonged to. But this is one of the very rare examples. You can imagine this re-identification of objects is a hard process, and it will take time and will be a huge scientific task for the next future. It has to be done, of course, by several researchers. At the moment, we are able to work on the medieval items of the collection thanks to extra funding by the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. The same situation applies for the documents. 50,000 approximately archival records were successfully rearranged into files concerning more than 2,400 different archaeological sites in former East Prussia. The files contain excavation reports, museum inventories, photographs, correspondence, and other papers. In connection with the re-identification of objects, these written sources play a decisive role. For example, here, as you can see, sometimes we just only have the objects survived, but in the case, if we do have these kind of archival cards, for example, we will be able to reconstruct the former context, the name of the site, the grave number, and all other objects that might have been part of the grave too. So it's partly or mainly kind of a really huge puzzle. Furthermore, the files contain a lot of sketches and drawings that provide us with information about topography and also character of prehistoric monuments. The files itself are now sorted according to the alphabetical order of place names. They are also kept in the Museum for Prehistory and Early History in Berlin in the archive. Not only in Berlin, but also in Kaliningrad, objects of the former Prussia collections were discovered unexpectedly during the last years. In the outskirts areas of the town, several thousand items could be re-excavated by the Russian colleagues between 1999 and 2001. Approximately 20,000 pieces, fragmentary, as you see here, but also complete items are now kept in the museum in Kaliningrad. Also, the inventory books, which were detected in the castle ruins in the 1960s, are nowadays kept in Kaliningrad Museum. 15 books in all are preserved, but only in parts. The oldest one covers the years between 1880 and 1893. The youngest one dates to 1938. The books keep the records of the museum collections, and even if there are huge gaps, they are quite important also in this process of re-identification of objects. The books were restored in 2007 by the colleagues from State Archive in Olsztyn in Poland, and on this opportunity the history of Prussia collection as it is now known has been published in a trilingual publication. Despite all these successful developments, there are three problematic features that characterize almost all parts of the Prussia museum collections preserved today. They are fragmentary and incomplete. They have lost their ancient associated context, and they are spread all over Europe, as you can see from this map. And it shows only the larger depositories. Nevertheless, of course, it's an unbelievable fortune that the systematically recorded record of more than 150 years of research of an entire region could have been recovered so many decades after its presumed loss. This situation constituted the initial point for our project. One goal will be the reconstruction of the archaeological landscape in former East Prussia before 1945. The idea is to regain the continuity of research that was established between 1790 and 1940. It is difficult to number how many archaeological signs were known at that time. The most comprehensive pre-war compilation was published in 1908 by Emil Hollack. He named approximately 1100 sites. This number increased considerably during the following 30 years. As already mentioned, we know about more than 2,400 archaeological places only from the archival remains. And the original number might even have been much higher. The second key aspect in the project is the research of continuity. It deals with the history of settlement in the region. Settlement is considered to have been an exceptional steady factor in the entire area. For example, there are numerous burial grounds that cover several sequent archaeological periods on site. Best example is the Samian Peninsula during the first half of the first millennium AD. Here you see the mapping of burial grounds from Roman Iron Age and from migration period. And from first sight, you can recognize close conformities between the places. Against this research background, we want to prove the hypothesis of continuity, referring also to settlement record. Is it possible to detect residential areas that had been in function over a longer time and even over several periods? In the project, we will focus on the distinctive hill forts. They are a widespread phenomenon in former East Prussia on the left map, but they are also common in neighboring territories. Between 1937 and 1940, Hans Krome, for example, mapped and published the known monuments. He then counted more than 420 prehistoric fortifications in East Prussia. Age and function of these monuments are normally not known. Pre-war research was much more interested in the excavation of burial grounds than in settlement research. Most of the monuments are well preserved and still visible in the open country. Just to show you some impressions. The idea that the hill forts might have been used over several periods and could even be dated back to late Bronze Age and early Iron Age has been discussed by different researchers for quite some time. It is based on the fact that hill forts and burial grounds sometimes constitute small groups of related monuments. In this example, you see a burial ground from the Roman Iron Age up to the Middle Ages, just opposite of a mighty hill fort. Nothing is known about its chronology, and also some grave mounds from the Bronze Age were detected in the distant neighborhood. The chronological system in the area is mainly based on pre-war research. While the younger Iron Age has been quite finely divided essentially by Otto Tischler, the older Iron Age always has been a more or less unclear time span. In a German-Russian publication on the Kaliningrad discoveries of the Prussia collections from 2005, it is said, quotation, "The landscape between rivers Vistula and Neman during the last centuries before Christ is difficult to describe, since research on settlement and burial grounds is missing." And even if the colleagues have started new investigations in the region, the description of the situation is still true. So how do we plan to execute our settlement research? Actually, this concept is still under discussion, also with colleagues in the countries in question. But starting with the huge archival materials, we hope to get information on monuments that is widely unknown so far. This work will be combined with field work. To give a short idea, I will show you the steps as we think they might function. The first is the evaluating of the old data, for example, the sketches. Then collecting all information in a database. Afterwards, trying to localize the monuments and the landscape. Then trying to characterize them by archaeological and natural scientific methods. And finally, mapping them as recent monuments. Concluding my paper, I want to sum up our two main objectives and give you a short idea of our next steps. One main task, as I said, in the project will be the reconstruction of the archaeological landscape in East Prussia before 1945 to allow the reconstitution of the interrupted continuity of research. With this, we also want to support, of course, modern recent archaeological research in the region. Sources for this objective will be all documents and items that survived the war. And here mainly point 2 and 3 are important in this context. Our second main objective in the project will be archaeological research on settlement development in the region, including new data on the chronology and on the character, especially of the hill forts. This will be, this have to be, of course, an exemplary work. Even 18 years are not enough for investigating all monuments. So here, at the moment we are working on our database. It will be organized similar to an analog archive of archaeological sites. The user will find all information about an archaeological place under its former German name, which will of course be correlated with its nowadays Polish, Russian or Lithuanian name. In the end, we hope the database will also include all archival documents. The database itself will be available, or will be made available for international research on the internet. And if you are interested in our topic, you can follow the progress of our project on our website, akademieprojekt-baltikum-eu. And now, thank you very much for your attention.